Welcome back, everyone. Let's begin to settle into our places. I hope you all had a lovely dinner. I enjoyed mine very much. And let's take a moment at the beginning of this session to welcome ourselves. So maybe relax in your chair. Take a deep breath. And let's also welcome our companions who are not seen, not physical. And let's welcome this evening's session. So before I begin tonight, we have these lovely cushions. And tonight we will be Skyping in David. He unfortunately couldn't travel physically to be here. But if anyone would like to come down and lie or sit on these cushions, you are very welcome. They're nice and comfy. And I will just continue talking, but if you feel the urge to come sit on a cushion, feel free to just come down. So it is my great honor tonight to introduce David Spangler. I first encountered David's work when I was on a military transport plane. Yes. I was going to Afghanistan, and my job was to first deceive or manipulate people, and if that didn't work, to kill them in the second instance. I didn't actually like this, and as you can imagine, I was in a very conflicted state within myself. I felt very divided against myself. I also didn't know if I was going to come home or not. So I had David's autobiography called Apprentice to Spirit, and I began reading it on the plane. And what I experienced was transformative. David's writing, his presence kind of came through the writing for me. And what he was communicating about was a way of being in the world that tapped into wonder, that tapped into wholeness, and that tapped into the love that is at the center of each of our decisions to come into this world in the first place. And that was one of the things that made me want to come home from Afghanistan, made me want to survive the experience. And it's one of the things that gave me tools to be able to work with a very difficult situation and deal with it successfully. David is a good friend of this community. He was the director of the Findhorn Foundation, the co-director, during the 1970s, and he was instrumental in creating many of the educative practices that we have now. So moving it from a community to being a community and also kind of an education institution, which we are now. After that, he founded the Lorien Association, which I referred to this morning, and that is a group of people, and its identity has changed over the years, but it teaches these essential tools for incarnation. It has developed incarnational spirituality, a series of ways of being and also practices that tap into this. Tap into our inner resources, I would say. It allows me personally to see myself as sort of a resource, as a center of influence, as a center of blessing to the world. And it's helped me to see, and I think many other people, it's fair to say, see themselves as see their incarnation as an act of love. One other thing I will say about them is they really helped me to overcome my sense that spirit is up here, and then my body is down here, and spirit's great, and the body is, not so great, it's very difficult, and so on. So David really helped me see the wholeness and incarnate in a way that was whole. So if the tech people are ready, I'm very happy to Say hi to David.
How about that? All right. Technical wizard that I am. Now we are all ready to go. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. And I only wish that I could be with you physically as well. But I'm happy that I'm so well represented by many friends, and in particular by my lovely wife, Julie. So welcome guests, and welcome to all the presenters who will be enriching this conference over the next few days. And welcome to all of you who are residents of the Findhorn community, and of course to all the subtle beings who are sharing this time and space with us. Findhorn is really a perfect place for this conference on co-creativity with the subtle worlds, because Findhorn exists because of that co-creativity. And I would like to give recognition at this point to two people whom I consider the patron saints of this conference. And that is Dorothy McLean, who connection with the Devas really made the garden possible and brought Findhorn as we now know it into public awareness and into being. And the other is Robert Ogilvie Crombie, or Rock as we knew him, and his connections with the nature spirits augmented Dorothy's insights and gave a fairly complete picture of the many types of subtle beings that were in cooperation with us back in the early days of the community. So kudos and recognition to Dorothy and to Rock. And Rock would have to be with us from the subtle realms, but Dorothy is still with us physically. In some ways, I feel like a subtle being myself. Here I am in my world, speaking to you in your world. As far as you're concerned, I'm a disembodied presence. And I often think of the internet as a kind of virtual simulator for training us in dealing with the subtle worlds. So many of the experiences that the internet makes possible are digital equivalents of experiences that people have when engaging with the subtle worlds. And this is one of them. We're demonstrating that right here tonight. I listened to the opening ceremony this morning, very early my time this morning. Wonderful presentations by Thomas and Mary and Freya and Judy. And I had to laugh because Mary, a number of the things you said were what I was going to say tonight. So at different points in my talk, you may hear me say, as Mary really said so eloquently this morning. But listening to the presentations and then having an opportunity to sit in on the home group that Julie and Freya facilitated, it got me thinking about why we're here tonight. I know I'm scheduled to talk about the subtle worlds as an ecology, and I will, but I think it's important for us to take a moment and explore just why we want to be engaged with the subtle worlds, why that's important to us. And I know every one of you here this evening will have your own reason for wanting to do this. And some of these reasons may be to connect to a larger whole, to achieve greater self-understanding, for purposes of bringing hope and joy into your life. Perhaps you're simply wanting a friend. Perhaps you're looking for guidance or information. And certainly in Findhorn's early days, it was the information that Dorothy brought through from the Devas that made the garden possible. So there are many reasons for seeking out the subtle worlds, but underlying all of them, I believe, underlying this conference and why it is important, is an intuition that humanity is seeking to rediscover itself and its place in the world, to recognize that the world in which we live is a greater whole than we experience if we only see and only accept its physical manifestation. I believe all of us are experiencing a call to create wholeness, a planetary wholeness, in which the physical and non-physical realms, which really are part of a single presence, and be recognized as such, and their co-creative and cooperative relationship facilitated, much as it was here in the beginnings of this community. And I believe this is a call that most human beings are feeling, even if they do not recognize it as such. But part of the challenge in answering this call is that we have a long, very long history of thinking about and relating to the subtle worlds in particular ways. In the early 1800s, in America, the Fox sisters introduced the phenomenon of communication with spirits in the afterlife. And from the seeds of that grew spiritualism, the spiritualist church and the spiritualist traditions. And of course, there were a number of other traditions paralleling this, but I choose to pick out spiritualism because what defined that movement was having communication with the subtle world, with the afterlife, in ways that would bring comfort and would bring guidance and would bring information to the human being. And there was a certain emphasis on finding one's guide, one's inner point of contact with wisdom and help. So it was as if the relationship with the subtle worlds, and this certainly didn't start with spiritualism, but spiritualism highlighted it, was akin to our going to Google today. Some great search engine in the heavens that would give us the information we needed, would give us the comfort we needed, would give us the reassurance that physical life was not all that there is. And you can look back to the ancient Greeks and to the Egyptians and the Romans and long traditions of oracular relationships with the subtle worlds. And the point is that the way in which we think of these realms is actually not particularly co-creative. I don't co-create with Google when I'm looking for information. And if all I'm seeking from the inner worlds is guidance, I'm not co-creating really with those realms, at least not in the way that is possible. So I feel that part of the calling that is upon us these days is to redefine in some ways, to expand the imagery through which we view and understand the non-physical dimensions of the earth. For one thing, as Mary said eloquently this morning, the subtle realms aren't really locations in the way that Forres is a location, or London is a location, or Issaquah is a location. The subtle worlds exist in, I guess, what we could think of as bands of frequencies. And the metaphor I often use is, as I sit here in this room, I'm surrounded by television broadcasts from ABC and CBS and NBC and Fox News, just as you are with the BBC and ITV and Channel 4. And all of these broadcasts are coexistent in this room. It's not as if ABC is over, in that direction of the room and NBC is over there. There's no place I go in my house where I will get Fox News but not MSNBC. There's no place you would go at Findhorn where you would get BBC but not ITV, I assume. All of these frequencies, these broadcasts, are coexistent, and which ones you receive, which ones you attune to, depend entirely on the channel you select. However, when we think of the subtle worlds as locations in consciousness, this requires us to think deeply about the nature of consciousness, doesn't it? What is a location in consciousness? For many people, that will have a purely psychological meaning. If it exists in my consciousness, then in some way it exists inside of me, and it is a psychological phenomenon, perhaps a neurological phenomenon. All of the metaphors or the ways we use to describe the subtle worlds, they are realms of thought, they are realms of mind, they are realms of energy, they are realms of spirit. Frankly, we don't know what any of that means. For the simple reason that we're using words that have meaning to us at a physical level. We know what mind is for us. We know what consciousness is for us. We know what feelings are for us. But can our physical experience be translated directly? Does it correlate exactly to the realities of the non-physical world? From my own experience, and this is just my own experience, these are my field notes, my observations, I would say that it doesn't. What I encounter in the subtle worlds isn't easily described by words like energy or mind or thought or imagination or any of these terms that we normally use. And it's not because the terms are wrong. It's just that in some way they're incomplete. One way in which they are incomplete is that they are the heritage for us in our culture of the age of reason. This was a time when mind and rational thought became privileged over the body, privileged over emotions, privileged over spirit. And Descartes put it very succinctly: I think, therefore I am. But in the subtle worlds, that's reversed. I am, therefore I think. Therefore I have a body. Therefore I feel. Therefore I have presence. Perhaps the first step in co-creation with the subtle realms is to come back to a sense of our full-bodiedness, and to realize that we engage with the subtle worlds not just through what's here from the neck up, but from the whole of our body, our whole incarnational system, our whole presence. Because that's how subtle beings seek to engage with us. Now, they can certainly engage with us through our particularities, through our minds, through our emotions. They can tickle our bodies. They can reach us through our imaginations. But from their point of view, it's like they're having to limit their speech. Instead of using the fullness of their language, and their language is the fullness of themselves, they're having to restrict it to the syntax of thought, or the grammar of emotion, or the wording of physical sensation. So perhaps a place where we start in seeking this co-creativity is by learning how to be fully in our embodied presence, to recognize our wholeness, and not think of the subtle worlds or of contact with the subtle worlds in a purely mental or psychic way. If we are waiting for humanity as a whole to develop psychic powers, we may wait a long time. For that matter, if we're waiting for all of humanity to develop a loving spirit, we may wait a long time too, but there's a difference, because if I say, and I have, so many people have said this to me over the years in workshops and classes, I cannot engage with the subtle worlds because I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, I'm not psychic. And if I make my psychic capacity my threshold, the threshold I must cross before any kind of co-creativity is possible, then I'm limiting myself. We are more than just vessels for psychic activity. And our colleagues in the subtle realms are more than that as well. But what does connect us isn't psychic ability by itself, or even alone, or even at all, but a very much used, often misunderstood quality that we call love. What connects us is resonance. And resonance is a coming into harmony with each other, and nothing brings us into that harmony quite like love. So if I want to come into communion with subtle beings, a place for me to start is, how do I hold love in my being? And not as an abstraction, but for the world that is around me. Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to it. One of my non-physical colleagues said to me a couple of years ago, he said, I know you're probably not going to do this, but we would really like it if you would stop referring to us as subtle beings. And of course, I'm not sure how else to refer to them. That's easy to say, doesn't require lots of words. But the point that this being was making was, himself, he was not a subtle being. He was a fully embodied, incarnate being existing in a different frequency of life. And more than that, he was trying to make a point that our thinking, the way we think about these phenomena and this separation between the physical and the non-physical, can set up cognitive barriers in our own minds that make it hard for us to commune with beings who don't share this frequency with us. There are many ways of connecting with and communicating with subtle beings, and I know that throughout this week, you have such a fine group of presenters and teachers and people who are experienced in this area, and I know that they're going to be giving you valuable techniques and methods and ways of thinking about this. And you will need to find what works for you. But I think all of us need to start recognizing and honoring our human embodiedness, and recognizing that we're part of a planet that, from its point of view, from, say, Gaia's point of view, there is no physical realm. There is no non-physical realm. There is only Gaia's realm. There's only the world, with all of its rich and myriad dimensions of beingness. And if I can get that sense into my body, if I get that into my being, suddenly communing with and communicating with non-physical beings doesn't seem so improbable. It doesn't seem like something that only special people can do, or that I have to go through some special training and develop special abilities in myself in order to do. Each of us is a subtle being already. We are amphibious in that sense. I mean, we dwell simultaneously in Earth, in Gaia. We dwell simultaneously in physical and non-physical realms. So part of us already knows how to navigate, how to work, how to communicate, how to engage, how to co-create in the subtle world, because it's doing it just as the physical part of us knows how to do that at this level. But obviously the challenge is, how do I bring my mind, how do I bring my heart, my body, how do I bring myself to a place where the divisions between these two aspects of myself, not to mention aspects of the world, begin to drop away and coalescence can take place. And this is just a personal opinion, but I think to do this, we need to step away from a purely spiritual view of the subtle worlds. That is, that if I really engage with the subtle world, somehow I'm making spiritual progress, that this coalescence between the subtle part of me and the physical part of me is a mark of spiritual achievement. There are other things that mark our spiritual achievement in terms of the love and blessing and fostering of wholeness that we bring out into our world. But recognizing that I have a left hand and a right hand, that I have a left lobe and a right lobe, that I have a physical side and a non-physical side, that's not spiritual, that's just good biology. That's just good metaphysical physiology. And it doesn't require training per se. It requires a shift of thinking. So that's part of what we're grappling with here. Is how do I make even the tiniest shift, or in some cases a big shift, out of thinking of myself as a physical being attempting to make contact with the subtle realms, to thinking of myself as a Gaian being, a whole planet being, seeking to exercise the capacities that are inherently mine because I also am a whole being. And I'm a whole being in my incarnation, in my embodiment, as well as in my soul and in those parts of me that inhabit the subtle realms. If I think of, well, when I began lecturing, it was in 1965. I was 20 then. I'd been invited to Los Angeles to a metaphysical center run by some friends of mine. And they said, David, we'd like you to come and give some talks. And so I did. I said, great. Because I felt this inner calling to walk a particular path of working with the interface between the subtle and physical sides of life. And this was how I started. When I got to this center, I was waiting one evening to give my talk. And the classroom where I was going to be speaking was being used by another teacher. And this person was running a bit late. So I showed up and that class was still going. And I was waiting outside the door. And finally it ended. Not too late, but it came to an end and people were filing out. And I was curious. And I said to one of the men who was coming out, well, what was this class about? What were you learning? And he said, we're learning how to channel. We're learning how to go into trance and channel a non-physical intelligence. And I said, Oh, that's very interesting. Why do you want to do that? And I was genuinely curious. Why did this person want to do this? And he said, well, because that's how you grow spiritually. Unless I can channel, I can't be a spiritual person. I mean, that's what he said, and that's what was being taught. That their spirituality, their sense of spiritual worth was tied up to this being in contact with beings whom they felt were inherently wiser than they were, simply because these beings weren't in physical embodiment anymore. Not an uncommon supposition. But we want to step away from that thinking and begin thinking instead that I feel, that we are part of this vast planetary ecology. And the subtle beings, I have to say, there's some bias here because my background is that of a biologist. So I tend to think in biological metaphors, and the idea of thinking of the subtle realms as an ecosystem appeals to me. It's probably not entirely accurate, but it works for me. But the important part of that image, there's two parts that are important. One is that it conveys the sense that subtle beings are organisms, that they're life forms, just like you and me. Different, yes. And it's not always easy to describe that difference. Like I said at the beginning, we use words like energy and thought and so on to try to get a handle on what the substance is that makes up these non-physical dimensions. But whatever the substance is, the beings that are inhabiting it and using it for their embodiments, they're organisms like you and me. They have to obey certain principles of life, not necessarily the same ones that you and I do, but ones that are relevant to their way of being. If I think of them as life forms, it takes away some of the patina, some of the glamour that gets associated with non-physical beings. Angel as organism, the Findhorn angel as a life form. The other reason that I like to think of this as an ecology is because ecology suggests interconnectedness and interdependency. And these beings, as every bit as much, and actually in some cases a good deal more than we as physical beings, are melded or coupled with their environments. Here in our world, as Mary was implying this morning, we move from location to location. We see ourselves as this kind of atomic particle moving through space. And right now, you're in the Universal Hall. When this talk is done, and you get up and you go out, you'll move to your bungalows, you'll move to your caravans, you'll move to the bus that takes you back to Clooney, you'll move to the community center. And it's as if there's all these different environments out there that you move between. But what isn't so apparent for us is the way in which we are connected to each of these environments, and we are in some way shaped by them. But this is very true for the subtle world, because environments in those domains are often the emanations of subtle beings. And part of the structure of life for a subtle being is what I would call the sphere of its relationships, its connections. If I took away from you all memory of all your connections, the people you know, the places you know, your memories, and you were devoid of all relationship, would you be the same person? Would you be the individual you recognize as yourself? When I find myself in contact with a subtle being, if I only feel it in my mind, I know it's not a good contact. If I feel it in the entirety of my body, then I trust it more. It feels like a good contact. But part of that body that is making that connection is my relationship with my environment, my local environment, and my sphere of relationships, the connections I have with my world and with the people I know in my world. When a subtle being connects with me, in a way, that being is connecting to me as a partner to Julie, my wife, or me as a father to my children, or me as a friend to Freya and Jeremy, or to Soren, who's sitting next to Julie, or Mary, or Judy, or any of my many friends. We see ourselves as these particles, but many, not all, but many subtle beings do not. They see us as an amalgamation, as a wholeness of many elements that weave together. So the more I can stand in my wholeness and stand in what I call my sovereignty, stand in that sense of presence of who I am, of what I'm connected to, of the place where I am, the more I exhibit the kind of characteristics that to which a subtle being can resonate more fully than if it's only trying to reach me through my mind. Let's think for a moment about co-creativity. And ask ourselves, what is it we want to achieve by co-creating with spirit? You can look around in the community there and you see a community that has evolved from roots sunk deeply into this co-creative process. Whether it was Eileen's communication with the sacred, whether it was Peter's intuition, Dorothy's contact with the devas, Rock's contact with the nature spirits, or many other people who came to the community and have been part of the community all these years, who have brought their own unique attunements. What has made Findhorn special is this underlying co-creative assumption, or I should say, this underlying assumption of co-creative relationship. But again, the question is, why and how? So the why goes back, I feel, to just to what I've been saying. The earth, Gaia, if you wish, the consciousness of the earth, the life of the earth, seeks to express its wholeness, and we are part of that wholeness. In some ways, you know, the phenomenon of the garden was the least of what was happening here 60 some years ago. And in fact, well, when I arrived in 1970, a lot of the phenomenal aspect of the cooperation with the Devas had ended. And they were not growing 40-pound cabbages when I was here. It isn't to say that all phenomena had stopped. I have a very clear memory of a eucalyptus tree that had no business growing in the sand in the north of Scotland, but actually growing very well. And I have very clear images of roses that had been deliberately planted to fail by a man who was tired of his wife bringing him up here. And he offered Peter to landscape the community with roses, and Peter said, wonderful. But he deliberately picked varieties of roses that he knew would die in this soil, in Scotland, and in the climate. So that when his wife dragged him back here the following year, which was the year I arrived, so I was here when this happened, he could say, oh, look, the roses died. Okay, dear, this place is phony, let's go fishing. But instead, Peter happily took him around and showed him all the roses, which were thriving, and this fellow said, oh my gosh, your roses are better than my roses, and mine are growing in a greenhouse. And he became a convert to what Findhorn was doing. So phenomena was still going on when I got here, but it was dying down. And the Devas said quite explicitly, we're not here to do glamorous things. I forget the exact wording. We're not here just to do a show. What we want is for you to learn how to be in a loving, cooperative, co-creative relationship with nature, which was not a matter of receiving guidance from the Devas, telling the gardeners what to do. It was a matter of the energy field of the gardeners blending with the energy field of the garden in a co-creative dance of mutual love and appreciation and acknowledgement. So in a sense, what Findhorn was trying to demonstrate, and I think continues to seek to demonstrate, wasn't getting messages. It was demonstrating a deepening into a place of partnership and based on mutual wholeness, a recognition of mutual wholeness, of mutual life, of mutual honoring and appreciation and love. And we think, well, you know, what's so special about that? But if we could really do it, if all of us did that on a consistent basis, it would be transformative. Part of the challenge that subtle beings, as I understand it, have with us, again, it comes back to the fact that we present a very narrow bandwidth for them to connect with. And they are very wide in their bandwidth, very wide in their loving, very wide in their sense of connectedness. And we just tend to narrow in. But if we begin to expand, we say, look, here's a coffee cup. It's alive. Here's an extra pair of glasses. They're alive. Here's my water glass. It's alive. Everything around me is alive. Not life as I know it. It's not biological life, but it is Gaian life. It is the life that permeates both the subtle and physical worlds. And just the simple act of beginning to feel that in one's being, to get a felt sense of being in connection with that, widens our bandwidth, so to speak, creates more space for our subtle allies to connect with. When I think about cooperating, when I think about co-creation, what is immediately at hand for me is the environment in which I live, and particularly its subtle environment. The energy fields, if you wish, that fill the house, that fill the room, that fill my neighborhood, just as you are in the energy field of Findhorn. And there's been much talk already about the buzz of that energy field and feeling the energy rising. And you want to be careful to stay grounded because the energy is heightening and so on. But remember, this energy is part of you as well. We are generating, we are participating in generating the environment that we live in. And it's those environments that become open and welcome to subtle beings or not. We could talk about the energy heightening it there in the conference, but we could equally talk about you are heightening. You are deepening. You are becoming more present because you are choosing that. You want to be more present. You want to soak in what the conference has to offer. But at the same time, you're not sponges. So you recognize you're there to generate your own gifts, your own presence, your own subtle beingness to the whole that you're in, to the hall, to the conference, to Findhorn. You begin co-creating with each other's energy. I mean, co-creating with Julie's energy when she's here and not in Scotland, or even when she is in Scotland, is more accessible to me than co-creating with one of my subtle colleagues. Because Julie and I, at least, occupy the same world. Just that all of you are occupying the same world at the moment there in the hall. And that's the place to start. We say, I want to communicate, I want to cooperate with spiritual beings, with subtle beings, but it starts with how we co-create and connect with each other. Because that broadens the bandwidth of our own presence. And it creates an environment of hope, of joy, of mutuality, of support, of love, that is like old homes week to those subtle beings that we wish to attract and with whom we would like to cooperate. Angelic beings, nature beings, Davic beings. We are part of their ecology. And in a sense, that is what we seek to do here, it's what Findhorn has always been seeking to do, is to broaden the reality or the expression of that ecology, so that it's not just limited to the interconnections with physical things, or it's not just limited to interconnections of subtle things, but it bridges the gap because that gap wants to be bridged. Gaia wants to be whole. And we are in incarnation, I feel, to be instruments of that. And this is not a psychic operation. It's not a religious operation. It is a whole life operation, if you wish, an incarnational operation, a Gaian operation. It is a being who we are, but with a greater recognition of who we are. All right, so I've been going about an hour, and I want to have an exercise with you. I very much want to appreciate all of you coming and being part of this conference, not because it's a Findhorn event and not because of the subject matter necessarily, but because you are making an intention, you are making a choice to be together, to bring something alive and fresh and new and productive and co-creative into the world. A spirit that you will gladly take back with you. Indeed, you will take it back because it's already there for you. You are that spirit of co-creative harmony, of co-creation with the fullness of life. There's probably lots of things I could still say, but I won't. You've been very patient, and I appreciate your patience. So let's have an exercise together. So I would like you to get comfortable in your chairs. I'm going to invite you to go into an inner space, an inner theater of your heart and mind. And I notice that I'm sitting here with my hands clasped, and the folks I can see are sitting there with their hands clasped. Let's unclasp our hands. There we go. And I want you to put your hands on your seat. Yeah, it's a little awkward given I'm fortunate my chair has arms to it. You have to reach down to the seat. And that's where we'll begin our exercise. So feet on the floor, hands on the seat. And I would like you to be aware of your body sitting in the seat. Aware of your life. The life coursing through your veins. The life that is in your breath. Appreciating that you are a living being. And honoring yourself, blessing yourself for the life that you embody and that you bring into the world. would like you, through your hands, to feel the chair you're sitting on. Can you feel that this chair is also alive? There is no blood circulating through it. It is not breathing. It cannot do what you do with your life. But there is energy there. There is a presence there. There is sacredness there. There is a circulation of spirit. Can you feel your chair as a living being? A subtle living being, if you wish. And as you do, feel a new kind of organism emerging, one that is made up of you and the chair. You and the chair, two different manifestations of Gaian life, of sacred life, recognizing and engaging with each other. And as you love and bless the chair on which you sit, it will respond. And love will flow back to you. And now there's a new circulation at work, a new bloodstream, if you wish, a flow of love and energy between you and the chair. Now I'd like you to feel the floor under your feet, the wooden steps on which your feet may be resting, or perhaps the floor of the hall itself, and recognize that the subtle combination of you and chair is resting on this floor. And so let your love, let your awareness, let your blessing and the blessing of the chair flow into the floor beneath you. Now something remarkable happens. The chair seats only you, but the floor holds all of you. You are all touching the floor of the hall, either directly or indirectly. You are all the chairs, all of you, held by the life that is in the floor of the hall. So feel your love and your communion flowing out into that life. And now a larger organism begins to emerge. And its life flows along the floor, up the walls, into the ceiling. And you and the chair and the floor and the hall become one living presence. each contributing your own unique form of life, your own unique way of loving, your own individual way of sharing presence. And now feel how this larger being that you are participating in co-creating rest upon the land. Your blessings flow out into the land, into the spirits of the land. And all the other buildings of Findhorn rest on this same land. The community center, the sanctuaries, the houses, the bungalows, the caravans, the gardens, the trees, the bushes, the sand dunes, it's all there. Your light, your love, your presence circulates into the land, into the organism that is Findhorn. You can see the possibilities, for there is no true ending to the connections you can form. Findhorn, the being of which you are a part, which you are helping to co-create, is part of Scotland and part of Britain, part of the earth. But we will stop with the land that is Findhorn. And I would ask you to give thanks to this land, to the buildings on the land, and draw your consciousness back into the hall. And give thanks to the life of the hall. And feel your presence flowing back through the floor, up into your chair, giving thanks to your chair for its service, for its presence, for its life. And then back into yourself. And if you want to clasp your hands on your lap, now is the time to do so. To embrace yourself. You embody the power to connect, the power to make whole. And it's that power that our allies and companions in the subtle world would co-create with. For they, like we, are all about bringing, creating, generating, manifesting the wholeness that is the earth. You can open your eyes and be back into this domain, and thank you very much. This is all I have to say, and I wish you all a fabulous conference.
I didn't get a chance to say thank you, David. Or maybe, actually, he's still listening, isn't he? Thank you, David. And yeah, thanks. And I'm glad he got non-reflective glasses because he looked a little scary earlier when he had these really shiny, like Max Headroom style ones. I want to say two things quite briefly. Number one, after this conference is over, I really hope that you continue learning. And I think for me personally, one of the best ways of doing that is with Lorien classes, Lorien Association classes. So you can find those at lorien.org. The second thing is we want to begin co-creatively, which is pretty appropriate for this conference, I imagine. So every morning we're going to have a brief space for people to share their experiences of the conference. This could be something about maybe how you found out, the synchronicities that led you here, or something that's happening to you now in the conference. If you would like to, I welcome that. Please come and see me, and I'll just tell you a few things that you will need to know about that. I will be around tonight after this, and I will be eating in the community center and having teas, so you can find me one of those times. Thank you.